one of the reasons that I believe the Young Turks exists, and one of the reasons that you watch it, is because the media almost always gets it wrong on the important stories. The way that they cover things like wars, the economy, scandals, things like that, it's just so rarely on the money in terms of their priorities. And so we want to spotlight a Media Matters study of how the major cable news networks covered the economy back in the month of April. And so we've got some charts breaking down the sorts of stories they covered, the stories they didn't cover, and I think that these are awesome. So let's bring up the first one. This is talking about total mentions of inequality in segments discussing the economy. You see that discussions of inequality are a minuscule section. And by the way, total discussions of the economy is not a particularly large portion of what goes on those networks.
Is that true? The total discussion of the
total
economy?
number of segments is not a very large proportion.
Right.
I mean, it's more than some other stories. We've also, by the way, before we discuss this, let's go to the breakdown of the networks there on this. And you can see the difference in the values between the different networks. So total mentions of inequality, MSNBC blowing Fox News out of the waters, which also, by the way, was higher than CNN, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And
there's no register on ABC, CBS, or NBC.
And
No
a couple
mention
things
whatsoever.
about this, if I've got it right. First of all, MSNBC, I think that was only about 25%, but they were way ahead of the others.
Exactly.
And secondly, I think Fox mentions it a lot because they like it.
Right, right. Or they're probably saying, MSNBC is talking about income inequality, and they're
Those
like,
idiots.
okay, income inequality.
Yeah.
Fox said it. But the
And also when they were
There's some-
slashing at, I was on Fox when they were attacking Occupy all the time, defending them. So
Yeah.
probably it might have been in the context
right
of
in the
Occupy.
mention. But RJ, I want to ask this of you. You look at the end there, you see CBS, NBC, and ABC,
Right.
nothing. And I saw that and I'm like, okay, you have these conservatives constantly attacking the mainstream media.
Mm-hmm.
If talking about income inequality is about, I think it's news and I think it's reportable, but if it's also about advocacy, you're seeing no advocacy from what is considered the mainstream media. So in fact, this goes right up against what Fox News says all the time.
Of course, no. Once again, it refutes the liberal media myth.
Exactly.
It's not a liberal. No, that's a great point. And the other thing is that, and again, not to always harp on this, but I do wish the president would use his bully pulpit more to talk about this, because if he did, then you'd see those numbers go up.
Exactly.
That's a good name
They
for what
have
the
to cover
president has, by the way.
I made it up. Do you
Bully
like it?
pulpit.
I
You
don't
should-
know what it means.
You should go with that. It's good.
I don't know
it works.
what either of those
Doesn't
words
work?
means,
Yeah,
but it
bully
sounds
pulpit.
natural.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
pulpit like that.
And we don't just casually
glad
bring
you
up.
like it.
Oh yeah. Well, we don't just casually talk about inequality. It's important. Now, apparently not important enough to merit a mention on several of those networks. But I think the governor of the Fed today said that the inequality we're experiencing right now is dangerous for the economy long term. In my studies in political science, like if there's anything that can bring down governments, it tends to be long-term inequality, because it drives radicalism in politics.
Yeah.
And so it's dangerous.
Which it is, by the way. You hear people say, well, but the Occupy thing didn't last. The Tea Party radicalism is being driven by income inequality.
Yeah.
That demagogues are channeling. This is really terrifying where this could go.
It's a
to speak
wellspring
to your
for anger
point.
across the country.
Yeah.
And it also leads the people who do actually have resources to fight all the harder to maintain them. And we see that as well in the national level. So let's go on to the next area. This is a breakdown of the economic priorities when the economy is discussed in segments. And there you see that deficit reduction significantly mentioned more than economic growth. I'm sure that does not represent what the people would care about if you ask them.
Right.
But obviously this is the bias of the networks.
I can quote you chapter and verse on that because I study all the polling on that. And by overwhelming margins, including Republicans, voters incredibly want the government to focus on economic growth and not on deficit reduction. It's like 3-1 in many cases, including Tea Party voters, 3-1. So what you see
Really,
in
including
that,
Tea Party, they don't want to talk about deficit reduction?
not to the extent that they do want
They
to,
probably
but not
still
to the
care about
extent.
it, but
I'll give you a sample.
That's what motivates
I'll
them
give
in
you
a
a
way.
sample statistic. 76% of self-described Tea Party voters said that they did not want to see Social Security cut as part of a deficit initiative. 76%. Yet all we hear about is deficit initiatives and the need to, Martha Raddatz saying to Obama and Romney, everybody knows we need to cut.
Yeah.
This is the distortion that we really see in the media.
Yeah.
If you want to see the strongest distortion, let's bring up the breakdown by network. Look at the difference. So here you see that it's relatively, like, they're not mentioned many times on some of these networks, but it's pretty close. But Fox News, by far, almost 2-to-1 mentioning deficit reduction as opposed to economic growth.
I want to hold, can we keep this graphic just long enough so that I can see, everybody can take a look and see that it looks almost, if you look at it, as if Fox News is giving the country the finger. Doesn't it? It looks like this, which is pretty much what they're doing.
Right.
Yeah, and by the way, while we're talking about the deficits, why don't we bring up this next one that shows you that when discussing deficits, do they actually put any context around it? No, they talk about the need that we need to reduce it when it is clear that it is being reduced, or that a policy like, for instance,
as
the Affordable Care Act.
As we learned this week. Too.
Right.
Exactly, yeah, that was great. That came out this week. But they don't tell people that.
That slide shows us there's no context and that the deficits are amazingly purple. But the thing, that's a very important slide too, because one of the things people never hear, that overly aggressive deficit reduction in Europe has actually made deficits worse and destroyed the economy. That's something you never hear, and that slide shows that. That very purple slide.
Very purple. Well, they got to mix it up from slide to slide. Let's go to one more on what could be leading to the deficits. The entitlements versus healthcare costs. Let's bring that up. Entitlement cuts being called for, very common. Healthcare costs driving deficits. No mentions whatsoever, whether the fact that it just in general it does lead to it, or that the Affordable Care Act made it a little bit less severe.
Right.
That's like the Sarkist right there, 27 to 0.
Yeah.
And if you look out 75 years at federal deficits, it's almost all healthcare. It's almost, and that's all the for-profit healthcare companies like Bain Capital investing. And it's amazing to me, not a single mention.
Yeah, and like to tie this all together, so why is it that their coverage of the economy is so devoid from what we know the people care about and what economists would suggest? Let's bring up that last chart. And you'll see who it is that's discussing the economy on these shows. Let's not bring in the economists. Let's just have the politicians and the journalists who are getting most of their information from politicians.
Right.
8 economists out of almost 200 discussions of the economy.
So
well, because everybody who's sitting around a TV, a show meeting in the morning saying, who should we bring on? No one in the history of television said, let's get an economist. They're great on
They rock. They just rock our audience. I wanted to know what that 38 other was. I mean, I'm assuming that's celebrities and people like that.
Well, Kim Kardashian was on Fox Business at one point.
Or doctors, or lawyers, or people, other professionals who might be, talking about.
Who might have a completely uninformed opinion on the topic. Right.
So if you want to find out more about that, you can head to Media Matters. It's one of their featured articles. And they also go into how exactly they coded. Is this a journalist? Is this a politician? Is this some mentions? Things like that. So if you're interested in the methodology, go check that out.